My wife made me a coffee with a strange smell. I swapped mugs with my Sil'S, and everything changed. You won't believe what just happened in my own home. My wife handed me a cup of coffee, but something was off. The smell, the taste, the way she looked at me, none of it made sense. And then my sister-in-law drank from that same cup, and suddenly everything changed. Stay with me, because what I uncovered will shock you, and leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust. I'd always considered myself a fairly observant guy. Maybe it was my upbringing, maybe just my nature, but I've always paid attention to the little things, subtle changes in tone. The way a person's smile doesn't quite reach their eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in posture when someone's hiding something. It's a skill I've leaned on for years, both in my professional life and at home. But even the best instincts can be dulled by familiarity. When you live with someone, when you love someone, you tend to overlook the small signs that might otherwise set off alarm bells. That's where I found myself that morning as I sat at Erica's dining room table for our usual monthly brunch. Erica's house was a cozy, sprawling ranch-style home in the suburbs, nothing too fancy, but warm and inviting. With the faint smell of lavender candles mingling with fresh coffee, it was a comforting routine, one I never thought I'd question. We'd all gather, my wife Olivia, her sister Erica, a couple of other family members, and spend a couple of hours laughing, catching up, and sharing a meal. But that morning was different. Something was off. Olivia, my wife of 7 years, was always the picture of elegance and charm. She had a way of making people feel at ease. Her soft laugh and quick wit a natural draw at any gathering. I'd admired that about her from the start. How she seemed to effortlessly command attention without ever seeming to try. She carried herself with a grace that was almost regal, yet she was grounded enough to enjoy a good joke or a casual game night. That's who she was, or at least, that's who I thought she was. On this particular morning, as she handed me my coffee, I caught the faintest hesitation in her smile. It wasn't obvious, nothing anyone else would have noticed. But I did. "Here you go, Honorable. I made it just how you like it," she said, placing the mug in front of me. Her tone was warm, cheerful even, but the words sounded rehearsed, like she'd said them to herself once or twice before speaking them aloud. I returned her smile out of habit, but my stomach churned. Something about her delivery felt off. I picked up the mug and brought it close. The coffee smelled fine at first, rich, smooth, with just a hint of the caramel syrup she knew I liked. But beneath that familiar aroma, there was something else. Something faint and metallic that made the back of my throat tighten. I didn't react immediately. I didn't even let my expression change. Years of learning to mask my emotions at work had taught me how to keep a neutral face, even when I was screaming inside. I took a slow sip, swishing the liquid around my mouth like I was some kind of coffee connoisseur. "Perfect, as always," I said, smiling at her. She smiled back, but her eyes flicked away from mine just a fraction of a second too soon. Erica was sitting across from me, scrolling through her phone while her own mug sat steaming in front of her. She didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Olivia turned away, chatting with Erica about some new recipe. She wanted to try, her voice light and casual. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I set my cup down and leaned back slightly, letting the conversation wash over me as I tried to piece it together. Over the past year, I'd been dealing with a slew of mysterious health problems: stomach pain, dizziness, nausea that hit me out of nowhere. I'd seen more doctors than I could count, gone through countless tests, and still had no answers. Each time, I'd shrugged it off as stress, poor diet, maybe just bad luck. But sitting there that morning, holding that cup of coffee, a different thought crept into my mind. I glanced at Olivia out of the corner of my eye. She was laughing at something Erica had said, looking as poised and radiant as ever. But there was that flicker again, just a fleeting moment where her mask slipped, and I saw something in her expression that sent a chill down my spine. Was it guilt? Nervousness? I couldn't tell. I tried to push the thought away. It was ridiculous. Olivia had always been my anchor, my partner. She was the one who'd nursed me back to health after a bout of the flu, who'd stayed up late making sure I was comfortable after I'd pulled my back out. She wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. The idea that she could have anything to do with my illness was absurd. And yet, I couldn't ignore the growing unease in my gut. When Olivia turned her back for a moment to grab something from the kitchen, I acted without thinking. My hand darted out and swapped my mug with Erica's. It was a quick, subtle movement, barely noticeable. I settled back into my chair as Olivia returned, her bright smile firmly in place. "You sure you don't want more cream in that?" she asked, gesturing to my now Erica's mug. "No, it's just right," I replied smoothly. The minutes ticked by, and I kept my eyes on Erica, watching for any sign, any slight change in her demeanor. At first, nothing happened. She sipped her coffee, glanced at her phone, and joined the conversation like usual. But then I saw it. The faint tremor in her hand as she lifted the mug. The subtle way she shifted in her seat, rubbing her temples. I held my breath, heart pounding. "I feel a little off," Erica muttered, setting her mug down. Olivia's head snapped toward her, the concern in her eyes almost convincing. "Weird how?" she asked. "I don't know," Erica said, flexing her fingers. "Just tingly. Lightheaded, maybe." My chest tightened as I watched Olivia's reaction. There it was again, just a flicker, but enough to confirm what I was starting to believe. I sat perfectly still, masking the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't paranoia. Something was happening. And for the first time, I had a horrible feeling I knew who was behind it. As I sat there, watching Erica subtly struggle with her coffee, the realization that something was terribly wrong started to settle in. My gut told me that what I was seeing wasn't just some random illness coming on suddenly. The memory of that strange metallic smell wafting from my own cup was still fresh in my mind. I tried to act normal, keeping my face calm, but on the inside, my thoughts raced. Olivia was still chatting with Erica, her voice smooth and light, but I could see her glancing at me every now and then, as if trying to gauge my reaction. She knew something. I was sure of it. And the more I watched her, the more I began to wonder just how deep this rabbit hole went. Erica rubbed her temple again, her movements small but noticeable. She let out a faint sigh and set the cup down, her hand lingering near the handle as though the simple act of lifting it had drained her energy. I fought the urge to stand up and ask if she was okay. Not yet. I needed more time to observe, to see if my suspicions were correct. But my hands clenched into fists under the table, nails digging into my palms, as I forced myself to stay still. Olivia glanced my way again. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes, there was something in them, something that didn't quite match the lightness in her tone. She was watching me closely, too closely, and it was clear she was waiting for something. For me to react, perhaps. For me to confirm that I'd drunk the coffee. But I hadn't, and I wasn't about to. "Feeling okay, Erica?" Olivia asked, her voice still as smooth as silk, but with a faint edge that only someone listening closely might catch. Erica gave her a weak smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. "Probably just need some water." She picked up her glass of water and took a slow sip, but her hand trembled slightly as she set it back down. I could feel the tension in the air now, thick and heavy, and I knew Olivia felt it, too. It was subtle, but her shoulders were just a little too rigid. Her movements a bit too controlled. She was trying to keep up appearances, but the cracks were showing. I kept my eyes on Erica, trying to piece together what might be happening. She'd looked perfectly fine when we arrived, cheerful and full of her usual energy. But now, after just one cup of coffee, she seemed drained, off balance, as though something had been sapping her strength. The more I thought about it, the more it started to click. This wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. I'd felt the same way countless times before: nausea, dizziness, that strange tingling in my hands. And each time, it had happened after something Olivia had prepared or brought to me. It was like she knew exactly when and how to hit me, keeping me off guard, making me question myself. And now, as I watched Erica's slow decline, it felt like a cruel pattern was repeating itself. "Maybe you should lie down for a bit," Olivia suggested, her tone so gentle it would have seemed genuinely caring to anyone else. But I knew better. Erica shook her head. "I'll be fine," she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. Her hand went to her forehead again, and I saw her brows furrow, her lips press into a tight line. She looked more than uncomfortable, she looked ill. I wanted to say something, to do something, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I acted too soon, I'd tipped my hand. I needed to be sure. The conversation around the table grew quieter. Even the other family members, who'd been chatting animatedly just moments before, seemed to notice the change in the atmosphere. Erica's discomfort was becoming harder to ignore. Olivia sat back slightly, one hand resting lightly on the table, her other holding her cup. She looked calm, poised, but her gaze kept darting between me and Erica, as if she was measuring our reactions. I wondered if she knew I hadn't drunk my coffee. Did she suspect I'd switched cups? Was she trying to figure out why Erica, not me, was showing symptoms? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't let on that I was onto her, not yet. Erica shifted in her seat, letting out another quiet sigh. She looked down at her cup, then back at Olivia, and there was a flicker of confusion in her expression. "I don't know what's wrong," she said softly, almost to herself. "I was feeling fine earlier." Olivia leaned forward slightly, her smile still in place. "It's probably just the heat," she said, though the house was a comfortable 72 degrees. "Maybe you just need some fresh air." I watched the exchange carefully, every word, every movement. Erica seemed to accept Olivia's suggestion at face value, but I didn't. That faint metallic smell I'd noticed in my cup, it was like a ghost now, a phantom I couldn't shake. I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have. And Erica's symptoms were exactly what I'd experienced over the past year, time and time again. Stomach pain, dizziness, that nagging feeling of weakness that made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. How had I not seen it before? How had I missed the signs? Olivia had been so careful, so subtle, that I'd dismissed my own instincts. But not anymore. I was done ignoring the clues, done pretending it was all in my head. Erica reached for her glass of water again, her hand trembling more noticeably this time. I could see it in her face now. She was struggling to keep up appearances. She probably didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to draw attention to herself. But the signs were there. Her cheeks were pale, her movements slower, more deliberate, as though each one took more effort than it should. Olivia, for her part, remained calm, though I caught her glancing at me more frequently now. She was watching me, studying me, just as I was studying her. And I began to wonder, was she testing me? Was this some kind of sick experiment to see how I'd react? To see if I'd notice? The thought made my blood run cold. If that was the case, she'd underestimated me. I'd noticed. I'd put the pieces together, and now I was watching her every move. Olivia stood up, casually gathering some dishes to take to the kitchen. "I'll grab some snacks," she said with a smile, but her voice sounded too cheerful, too forced. I tracked her movements, watching how she carried herself. She wasn't as relaxed as she wanted to appear. Her steps were just a little too quick, her shoulders a touch too stiff. She disappeared into the kitchen, and for a brief moment, I considered following her. But I stayed put. This wasn't the time to confront her. Not yet. Erica turned to me, her voice faint. "I think I'll just sit for a while," she said, and I nodded, keeping my tone calm. "Take your time," I replied. "Maybe it'll pass." But I didn't believe it. I knew what was happening, or at least I thought I did. And if I was right, it wouldn't just pass. Olivia returned a moment later, carrying a plate of crackers and cheese, still wearing that practiced smile. "Here we go," she said brightly, placing the plate on the table. But her eyes flicked to Erica, then to me, and I saw that flicker again, the faintest hint of something dark and calculating behind her mask. I felt my heart rate pick up. My mind raced with possibilities. What was in that coffee? How long had she been doing this? And why? What would push someone to such an extreme? These questions swirled in my head, unanswered, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to ignore it any longer. I couldn't. Not when Erica was sitting there, pale and trembling, a living reminder of what might have happened to me if I hadn't trusted my instincts. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This is where it gets even more unsettling. I started piecing together all those little moments. I ignored the strange stomach aches, the odd glances, the nervous smiles. I have my suspicions, but what do you think is going on here? Drop a comment and tell me, is this all just a coincidence, or am I onto something big? Comment 1. If you think it's just bad luck. Comment 2 if you believe there's more to this than meets the eye. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't seen this coming. The signs had been there for months. Maybe longer, though I'd done my best to brush them off. Looking back now, the pieces fell into place so easily it almost made me sick to think how blind I'd been. The nausea, the dizziness, the way my hands sometimes felt like they weren't even mine, it all started about a year ago. But I never thought to connect the dots. I'd chalked it up to stress. Work had been relentless, and I'd convinced myself that the late nights, the skipped meals, the constant pressure to perform, were simply taking a toll on my body. I remember telling Olivia I felt off, that something wasn't right. She'd look at me with those wide, sympathetic eyes and say all the right things. "You're just overworked, honey," or "You need to take better care of yourself." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife. I never thought for a second that she might be the reason I was falling apart. It had started so gradually that I didn't notice at first. A slight queasiness here, a wave of fatigue there. Nothing that would set off alarm bells. I'd come home from work feeling a little more tired than usual, but I figured that's just how it was in your 30s. Everyone gets run down sometimes. Then it became more frequent. I'd wake up feeling drained, like I hadn't rested at all, and by mid-morning, I'd feel a faint tingling in my fingers, like I'd slept on them wrong. That's what I told myself anyway. I started avoiding coffee at work, thinking maybe I'd developed a sensitivity to caffeine. When that didn't help, I switched to herbal tea. But no matter what I did, the symptoms didn't go away. Olivia had been so supportive, or at least that's what I thought at the time. She was always ready with suggestions, a new multivitamin, a different kind of protein shake, more greens in my diet. "You'll see," she'd say, rubbing my shoulders. "You'll feel like your old self again in no time." I wanted so badly to believe her. But the truth was, nothing worked. The more I tried to take care of myself, the worse I seemed to feel. I went to the doctor, then another doctor, then a specialist. They ran every test under the sun: blood work, MRIs, even a spinal tap. The results were always the same: nothing. No clear cause, no definitive diagnosis. They called it idiopathic, and sent me home with a pat on the back, and a bottle of anti-nausea pills. It was maddening. I remember one day in particular. It was a Saturday morning, just an ordinary weekend, and I'd gotten up early to make breakfast. Olivia was still asleep, and I decided to surprise her with pancakes and scrambled eggs. I felt fine at first, better than fine, actually. I even hummed a little tune as I flipped the pancakes. But by the time I sat down to eat, my appetite was gone. My stomach churned, and that familiar lightheadedness crept over me. It was like a fog descending, dulling my senses, and making my hands tremble as I reached for my fork. I pushed the plate away and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The room felt like it was spinning. When Olivia came downstairs, she found me sitting there, pale and sweating. She was so concerned, so caring. "Oh, honey, you should have let me make breakfast," she said, fussing over me as she cleared the table. "You need to rest more. You push yourself too hard." I nodded, grateful for her support. But deep down, I felt a flicker of frustration. I'd been trying to rest. I'd been doing everything right. So why wasn't I getting better? It wasn't just the physical symptoms that wore me down. It was the constant uncertainty, the way I started to doubt myself. Was I imagining it? Was I being dramatic? I started to feel like a burden, like I was failing in some fundamental way. Olivia never said it outright, but I could sense her patience wearing thin. I'd catch her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. A faint furrow in her brow. "You really need to see someone," she'd say, her tone gentle but firm. "You can't just keep hoping it'll go away." I wanted to argue that I'd already seen every someone there was, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "You're right," even though I had no idea where to turn next. The worst part was how unpredictable it all was. Some days I felt almost normal, like whatever was wrong had just disappeared. I'd wake up with a clear head, no nausea, no tingling, and I'd think, maybe it's finally over. But then, without warning, it would come roaring back. I'd be in the middle of a meeting at work, listening to my boss talk about quarterly projections, when my stomach would clench like I'd swallowed a handful of broken glass. My vision would blur, my hands would sweat, and I'd feel like I was going to pass out. I'd excuse myself, stumble to the bathroom, and lean against the cold tile walls, trying to steady my breathing. By the time I got home, I'd be exhausted, mentally and physically. Olivia would greet me with a smile and a kiss, asking how my day went. And I'd give her some vague answer about the usual because I didn't have the energy to explain it all again. It wasn't until later, much later, that I started to see the pattern. Every time I got sick, it was after a meal at home. At first, I dismissed it. Coincidence, I told myself. But the more it happened, the harder it was to ignore. Sunday dinner, Thursday breakfast, even a quick sandwich on my lunch break, all of them seemed to trigger something. And yet, when Olivia would eat the same meal, she'd be fine. Healthy, glowing even. "Must have been something you ate," she'd say, her voice full of concern, as she handed me another glass of water. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't right. I pushed it down, refused to listen. Olivia was my wife. She loved me. There had to be another explanation. I remember sitting on the couch one evening, flipping through channels, when Olivia came in with a bowl of popcorn. She plopped down next to me, cheerful as ever, and we settled in to watch a movie. Halfway through, I started feeling off again. That same queasy, dizzy sensation that had become all too familiar. I told her I needed some air and stepped outside, leaning against the porch railing as the cool evening breeze hit my face. I stared out into the darkness, my mind spinning. Something had to be causing this. It couldn't just be stress, or bad luck, or some mysterious illness that every doctor had failed to diagnose. It was happening too often, too consistently. And the only common denominator was the food, the drinks, the little treats Olivia always prepared for me. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the thought. What if it wasn't random? What if there was more to it? I turned my head to look at Olivia, sound asleep next to me, her face serene, her breathing steady. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. But that nagging voice in my head grew louder. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something wasn't adding up. And as much as I hated to admit it, the woman I loved might not be the person I thought she was. I fell asleep with that thought echoing in my mind, a whisper of doubt that refused to be silenced. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Olivia was still chatting and smiling, but every time I glanced in her direction, her eyes would meet mine just a second too quickly, like she was waiting for me to say something, to react. It wasn't just her voice, it was her whole demeanor. Too smooth, too controlled. I was beginning to notice little tells I'd never picked up on before. The way she'd clasp her hands a bit too tightly around her coffee cup, how her smile would linger just a beat too long, before dropping back to neutral. It was as though she was overcompensating, trying to make me believe everything was fine. But I knew it wasn't. Erica's condition, on the other hand, was harder to ignore. She sat across from me, pale and quiet, her movements sluggish. It wasn't long ago that she'd been lively, cracking jokes and playfully teasing me about my weekend plans. Now, she was barely speaking, her hand occasionally drifting to her forehead as if trying to rub away an invisible fog. Olivia seemed concerned, at least, she appeared that way. "Are you sure you're feeling okay, sis?" she asked, her tone laced with just the right amount of worry. Erica nodded faintly, managing a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Maybe I just need some more water." She reached for her glass, but I could see her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted it. It reminded me of my own hands, how they would shake after I'd felt that strange, creeping nausea come on. A year's worth of those same symptoms flashed through my mind, like puzzle pieces rearranging themselves into a clearer picture. And standing at the center of it all was Olivia. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but I knew Olivia was watching me just as closely as I was watching her. Every time I shifted in my seat, or glanced at Erica, she'd flick her gaze in my direction. It was subtle, so subtle that if I hadn't been looking for it, I would have missed it. But now that I was tuned in, I couldn't unsee it. It was like watching someone play poker who thought they had the perfect poker face, but their eyes betrayed them every time. I started to wonder if she knew I'd switched cups. Had she seen it? Had I been too obvious? Or was she still in the dark, trying to figure out why Erica, not me, was the one looking ill? Erica set her glass down and leaned back in her chair, a faint sigh escaping her lips. "I'm fine, really," she said again, but the words lacked conviction. I caught Olivia stealing a glance at me, as if she was trying to gauge my reaction. My heart started pounding. I could feel the adrenaline kicking in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to let this play out, to keep watching. Erica shifted again, brushing her hand through her hair, and I noticed her breathing was a little faster than usual. She was trying not to draw attention to herself. Probably thinking it was just a passing discomfort. But I knew better. I'd been in her place too many times to believe this was nothing. Across the table, Olivia kept up her casual demeanor, talking about some new recipe she wanted to try, or a show she'd started watching. She was as smooth as ever, her tone light, her laugh effortless. But I noticed she was keeping her answers short, deflecting any attempts to bring the focus back to her. It was a subtle strategy: make herself seem engaged. Keep the conversation moving, but never linger long enough for anyone to ask the wrong questions. And while she spoke, her eyes darted to Erica every few seconds. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she worried her plan was unraveling? Did she think Erica would recover quickly and brush it off? Or was she starting to realize that she'd miscalculated? Erica excused herself to go to the bathroom. And as soon as she left the room, the air felt heavier. Olivia leaned back in her chair, swirling her coffee in slow, deliberate circles. Her gaze landed on me again, and this time, I held it. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, but Olivia broke it first, smiling that same practiced smile. "You've been awfully quiet," she said. "Everything okay?" I nodded, forcing a faint smile of my own. "Yeah, just thinking about work stuff. You know how it is." Her smile stayed in place, but I saw her shift slightly in her seat, as if she was trying to read between the lines. "Well, don't overthink it," she said. "You'll drive yourself crazy." I wanted to confront her then and there, to call her out on everything I was seeing. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned back and let the silence linger. I wasn't ready yet. I needed more. If I pushed too soon, she'd find a way to explain it all away. I'd seen her do it before, talk her way out of things so smoothly that you'd end up questioning yourself. I wasn't going to fall for that again. Not this time. When Erica came back, she looked worse. Her cheeks were flushed now, and she avoided everyone's gaze as she sat down. "I think I'm going to call it a day," she said, her voice faint. "Sorry, everyone, I just don't feel great." Olivia immediately jumped in, her voice full of sympathy. "Of course, sweetie. Do you need anything? I can get you some tea or a blanket." Erica shook her head. "No, I'll just head home and rest. I'm sure I'll be fine." I watched as Olivia smiled, nodding supportively. "Let me know if you need anything, okay?" As Erica gathered her things and prepared to leave, I could see the flicker of relief in Olivia's eyes. She hid it well, but it was there. I sat silently, observing. When Erica finally left, the room felt emptier, but the tension didn't let up. Olivia turned to me, tilting her head in that curious way she always did when she wanted to seem genuine. "You sure you're okay, An?" she asked. Her voice was so soft, so kind, but it grated on me like nails on a chalkboard. I nodded again, muttering something about being tired, and she reached over to squeeze my hand. "I'll take care of you," she said, her smile unwavering. "Don't worry." Her touch felt cold. I pulled my hand back, pretending to reach for my coffee cup, and I realized then that I couldn't trust a single word out of her mouth. Not anymore. I sipped the coffee Erica's cup and it tasted as it always did. Rich, warm, but now tinged with a bitterness that had nothing to do with flavor. I set the mug down and glanced at Olivia. She was already looking away, humming quietly as she picked up a few plates and carried them to the kitchen. She was good at this, too good, but I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. When Erica left the house, her absence brought a kind of uneasy calm, but I could still feel the tension between Olivia and me like a heavy weight pressing down on the room. I stayed seated at the dining table, not touching my coffee. Olivia, meanwhile, went about clearing the dishes with a breezy efficiency, her movements quick and deliberate. She kept humming softly, a tune I couldn't place, as if to fill the silence. But that hum, it was too cheerful, too rehearsed. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, pretending to scroll through my phone. My heart was racing, but I kept my face blank, not letting on that I'd been paying attention to every single detail. When she finally returned from the kitchen, she sat down across from me, her cup in hand, and offered a warm smile. "You seem distracted," she said, her voice light. Is everything alright? I looked at her, keeping my expression neutral, and nodded. Yeah. Just thinking about work, I replied. It was a safe answer, one I'd used before. But her eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, searching for something beneath the surface. You've been quiet lately, she said, tilting her head slightly. If something's bothering you, you know you can talk to me. There it was again, her voice so gentle, so caring, like she was genuinely concerned. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I'd heard that tone too many times over the past year, always paired with the same sweet smile, the same comforting touch on my arm. And yet, every time I'd accepted her reassurances, I'd ended up back at square one, confused, sick, and doubting myself. It felt like I was living in a loop I couldn't break out of. But today, something had shifted. Today, I couldn't ignore the patterns anymore. I couldn't pretend that all of this was just bad luck or coincidence. I glanced down at my cup now and then back at her. I'm fine, I said, forcing a small smile. Just a lot on my mind. She nodded, sipping her coffee as if nothing were out of the ordinary. But I knew she was watching me, waiting for any sign of hesitation, any crack in my composure. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my body language relaxed, and studied her without letting on. She seemed so calm, so in control, but there was something different today. Her hands were just a bit too still, her posture a bit too perfect. It was as if she was deliberately trying to look unbothered. But the effort was showing. The room felt quieter than it should have. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint rustle of the trees outside, everything seemed amplified. My ears were on high alert, and my mind was running through every interaction, every moment that hadn't made sense before. I thought back to the times Olivia had brought me food or drinks, always with that same smile, always urging me to relax and take care of myself. She'd been so thoughtful, so attentive. But now, that attentiveness felt calculated, like she'd been managing me, keeping me just off balance enough that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Maybe you should take a day off, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Just one day to clear your head and reset. It might help. I nodded slowly, considering her suggestion. Maybe, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I've been thinking about that. It was an innocuous response, but I saw the flicker of something in her expression. Satisfaction? Relief? I couldn't tell for sure, but it was there. She wanted me to step back, to let my guard down, and that realization only made me more determined not to. The thing about Olivia was that she was subtle. She never pushed too hard, never overplayed her hand. She'd mastered the art of planting ideas in my head and making me think they were my own. That's what had made it so hard to see the truth before. I'd been living with someone who knew how to stay just below my radar. Always one step ahead. Always prepared with an explanation or a distraction. But today, I was seeing her through a different lens. Her composure, her gentle suggestions, her concern, it all felt like part of a script she'd been perfecting. And for the first time, I was reading between the lines. She finished her coffee and stood up, taking her cup to the kitchen. I'll be right back, she said over her shoulder. I watched her go, my stomach tightening. The moment she was out of sight, I let out a slow breath, my mind racing. I needed to think, to piece this together before I confronted her. I couldn't let her know I was onto her, not yet. If I pushed too soon, she'd have an excuse ready, a way to turn it back on me. I had to be sure, had to have something concrete before I made my move. When she came back, she had that same serene look on her face, like she didn't have a care in the world. What's on your agenda for today? She asked, sitting down again. I shrugged. Not much. Just some errands. She nodded, her smile never faltering. Well, let me know if you need anything. I watched her, waiting for some hint, some tell that would give her away. But she was good, too good. I'd have to bide my time, keep watching, keep looking for that one moment where her mask slipped. And when it did, I'd be ready. I couldn't help but notice the way Olivia kept glancing at me, her gaze shifting between casual and calculating. It wasn't overt, she was too good at hiding her intentions for that. But after everything that had happened that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for me to give something away. I pretended to scroll through my phone, keeping my posture relaxed. But every nerve in my body was on edge. I could hear the faint sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the creak of the floor as she shifted her weight. Even the light tapping of her nails against the coffee mug was grating, each sound seeming to carry more meaning than it should. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there at the counter, her back to me, as though giving me space. But I knew better. She was listening, watching, trying to read my every move. When she finally turned around, her smile was soft, almost too soft, like she was putting on a show for an invisible audience. "I was thinking about making some soup for lunch," she said casually, as if the tension in the room weren't thick enough to cut with a knife. "Something light and easy, since it seems like we're all feeling a bit off today." Her tone was gentle, concerned even, but it hit me wrong. It felt rehearsed, calculated, like she was trying to steer the mood in a certain direction. I nodded without looking up. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Sounds good." She moved past me into the living room, her footsteps light and deliberate. I stayed where I was, eyes fixed on the glowing screen of my phone, though I wasn't reading anything. I was too busy piecing things together in my mind. Every interaction over the past few months played back like a highlight reel, moments I'd ignored or brushed off suddenly seeming significant. The times Olivia had been extra attentive, offering to make me tea when I felt nauseous, or suggesting I skip my workout when I complained about dizziness. It had all seemed so thoughtful at the time, but now, in hindsight, it felt like something else entirely. She'd been managing me, I realized, carefully, methodically, steering me away from noticing the pattern that had become so obvious now. "I'll start chopping some veggies," she called from the kitchen. Her voice sounded cheerful, but there was a tension in it, like she was trying too hard. I knew if I looked at her, she'd be wearing that same serene expression, the one that used to put me at ease. But now, it only made my skin crawl. I set my phone down and stood up slowly, stretching my arms as if I were just another guy shaking off a lazy Sunday. "Need help with anything?" I asked. The words felt foreign in my mouth, but I knew I had to keep playing along. "Oh, no, I've got it," she said quickly, her voice light. "You just relax. I'll have lunch ready in no time." I walked toward the kitchen anyway, keeping my movements casual, my hands resting in the pockets of my jeans. When I reached the doorway, I leaned against the frame and watched her for a moment. She was busy at the counter, chopping celery with a steady hand. The knife moved quickly, precisely, and I couldn't help but think about how effortlessly she seemed to handle everything. It was almost hypnotic, the rhythmic chop, chop, chop of the blade. But then she paused, just for a split second, and her hand hovered over the cutting board. It was so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching closely. Then she resumed, her movements fluid once again, as if nothing had happened. "I was thinking," I said casually, "maybe I'll take a quick walk around the block before lunch. Get some fresh air." She glanced up at me, her smile never wavering. "That's a great idea," she said. "I'll have the soup ready when you get back." Her tone was light, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes, a flash of calculation. It was almost as if she was relieved I was leaving, as if she needed me out of the house, even for a few minutes. I nodded, pretending not to notice, and stepped out into the cool afternoon air. As I walked, my thoughts raced. I replayed the scene in my mind, analyzing every glance, every subtle movement. Something had shifted in her demeanor, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The way she'd offered to handle everything, the quickness with which she'd encouraged me to go outside. It all felt too smooth, too easy. I started to think about what might happen if I hadn't come back right away, if I'd left her alone long enough to let her guard down. Would she make a mistake? Would she do something that would finally confirm what I already suspected? But then I stopped myself. I couldn't just leave her alone, not now. I had to be present, had to keep watching. If she was hiding something, and I was almost certain she was, I needed to catch her in the act. I turned around and headed back to the house, my heart pounding. I told myself to stay calm, to act normal, but every step closer to the front door brought a new wave of anxiety. What if she knew I was onto her? What if she was one step ahead? When I walked in, she greeted me with the same cheerful smile, a bowl of soup already steaming on the table. "Perfect timing," she said. "It's just finished." I thanked her and sat down, taking the spoon she handed me. The soup smelled amazing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I lifted the spoon to my lips, I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She was watching me, her smile still in place. "How is it?" she asked. I nodded, setting the spoon down. "It's good," I said, forcing a smile. "Really good. But I didn't need any more. I couldn't. Not until I knew for sure." When Erica began trembling, her face going pale as if the color had drained out of her all at once, my stomach dropped. I knew exactly what she was feeling. I had lived it too many times before. That creeping nausea, the sudden dizziness, the weakness that spread through your body like a poison. She looked at me then, her eyes wide and glassy, and for the first time, I saw fear. Real, unfiltered fear. I don't feel so good," she said softly, her voice trembling as much as her hands. She set her cup down, almost spilling it, and leaned back in her chair as though the effort to sit up right was too much. Olivia was already on her feet, fussing over Erica in that sweet, concerned way she had perfected over the years. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she cooed, placing a hand on Erica's arm. "You look so pale. Do you need water? Maybe you just need to lie down for a bit." The words spilled out quickly, and for a moment, I almost believed she was genuinely worried. Almost. But her eyes betrayed her. They flicked toward me briefly, just a flash before returning to Erica. It was subtle, but I caught it. That flicker of unease, of calculation, as if she was assessing whether I'd noticed what was happening. I stayed seated, watching carefully, my mind racing. Erica's breathing grew shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I think I just need to go home," she mumbled, rubbing her temples. "Maybe I'm coming down with something." Her voice was weak, as if she had to summon all her strength just to speak. Olivia hovered, her expression a perfect mask of concern, but her movements were quick, almost frantic. "Let me help you," she said, guiding Erica to her feet. "I'll get you a blanket. I'll call someone to pick you up." Her tone was so smooth, so practiced, that if I hadn't been watching her so closely, I might have been fooled. But I wasn't fooled anymore. Erica took a few shaky steps toward the couch, her legs unsteady. And I stood up finally, moving to her side. "I've got her," I said, my voice steady. I placed a hand on Erica's arm and guided her down onto the couch. She sank into the cushions, her head lolling back as if even holding it upright was too much effort. I could feel her trembling under my hand, and it sent a wave of anger through me. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my expression neutral, but inside, I was seething. I'd been in her place so many times, feeling that same inexplicable weakness, that same sense of my body betraying me. And now, watching it happen to Erica, I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't a coincidence. Olivia disappeared into the kitchen, claiming she was getting water, but I knew better. She was stalling. She was giving herself time to think, to figure out how to spin this. I leaned closer to Erica and lowered my voice. "When did this start?" I asked. "Was it right after you drank the coffee?" Erica opened her eyes halfway, looking at me with confusion and pain. "I don't know," she whispered. "I felt fine earlier. It just hit me all at once." Her words were faint, but I could hear the fear behind them. I wanted to tell her what I suspected, to warn her, but I couldn't risk it. Not yet. I needed more proof. Olivia returned with a glass of water, handing it to Erica with that same soft smile. "Here you go, sweetie," she said, brushing a strand of hair from Erica's forehead. "You just rest. I'll call someone to pick you up. Everything's going to be okay." Erica took the water, her hands shaking, and I watched as Olivia's eyes darted toward the coffee cup still sitting on the table. It was barely noticeable, just a quick glance, but I caught it. She was nervous. She knew something was off. I leaned back, folding my arms, and watched her carefully, waiting for her next move. "Maybe you should lie down upstairs," Olivia suggested. "You'll feel better if you just rest for a while." Erica shook her head weakly. "No, I just need to go home." Her voice was so faint I had to lean in to hear her. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll call you an Uber. Just stay here for a minute." She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly over the screen, but I noticed how she avoided looking at me now. Her focus was entirely on Erica, as if by ignoring me, she could pretend I wasn't there, watching her every move. While Olivia fussed over her phone, I looked down at Erica, who had closed her eyes again. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale and damp with sweat. My anger grew, but I forced myself to stay calm. If Olivia thought I suspected her, she'd shut down, deny everything, and I'd be left with nothing. I had to let this play out, even though every instinct told me to confront her right then and there. Olivia looked up from her phone. "It'll be here in a few minutes," she said, her voice sweet and steady. "Just hold on, okay? You're going to be fine." Erica nodded weakly, and Olivia sat down on the armrest of the couch, watching her with that same carefully crafted expression of concern. But I saw it now, what I'd been too blind to see before. It was all an act. Her movements, her tone, her gentle reassurances, they were too perfect, too rehearsed. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand she tell me what she'd done. But I couldn't, not yet. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for the car to arrive. I stayed close to Erica, watching her closely, hoping her symptoms would ease. Olivia stayed on the other side of the room, pretending to busy herself with her phone, but I could feel her eyes on me every so often. She was watching me just as closely as I was watching her. The tension in the room was suffocating, and every second that passed made it harder to keep my composure. But I knew I had to stay calm, had to stay in control, because the moment I let my guard down, Olivia would pounce. She'd turn the tables, make me doubt myself all over again. And I couldn't let that happen. Not now, not ever again. As the minutes stretched on, I couldn't shake the growing tension in my chest. Every second Erica stayed slumped on that couch felt like an eternity. I kept my face calm, but my mind was racing, piecing together every subtle detail. Olivia was moving around the room, fiddling with her phone, checking on Erica, glancing my way occasionally. It was clear she was doing her best to keep up appearances, to look like the concerned sister-in-law, but I wasn't buying it. Her actions were too calculated, too polished. She was trying hard not to look at that coffee cup sitting on the table, as if avoiding it entirely might erase it from existence. I leaned back in the chair, trying to appear relaxed, but my senses were heightened. Every sound felt louder. Every glance felt heavier. Erica was still pale, her breathing shallow, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the water glass Olivia had given her. The more I watched, the more the anger inside me began to build. I had felt that same weakness, that same betrayal of my own body, so many times before. But this time, it wasn't just me. It was Erica. She didn't deserve to be dragged into this, to be used as part of whatever Olivia was plotting. I had spent months doubting myself, questioning whether my illness was real, whether I was imagining things. But seeing Erica now, seeing her suffer in the exact same way, confirmed everything. It was real, and Olivia was behind it. Olivia spoke softly to Erica, her voice smooth and soothing. "Just rest, sweetie. The car will be here any minute now," she said, brushing a hand gently over Erica's shoulder. I caught the faintest hesitation in her movements, the smallest flicker of tension in her tone. She was nervous, not for Erica's health, but for herself. She knew the truth was inching closer to the surface, and she was scrambling to keep control of the situation. I could see it in her eyes when she glanced at me. A quick, sharp look that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. But I noticed it, and it made my pulse quicken. Erica shifted slightly on the couch, groaning softly. "I just feel so weird," she murmured, barely audible. Olivia crouched next to her, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "It's okay," she said, her tone dripping with reassurance. "You're probably just coming down with something. Once you get home and rest, you'll feel much better." Her words were comforting, but to me, they felt like a script. She had said similar things to me in the past, back when I first started feeling sick. Always quick to offer a simple explanation. Always ready with a solution that conveniently kept me from looking any deeper into the cause. It was a pattern I recognized now, and it made my skin crawl. I stood up slowly, stretching my arms as if I were just trying to shake off some stiffness. "Maybe I'll get some fresh air," I said, my voice calm. Olivia looked up at me, her smile unwavering. "Sure," she said. "That might help clear your head." Her response was casual, but I caught the flicker of relief in her expression. She wanted me out of the room. I stepped outside, taking a deep breath of cool air. The wind was brisk, the sky overcast, and the street quiet. I let the door close behind me and stood there for a moment, staring at the front yard. My mind was racing. Should I confront her now? Should I wait until I had more proof? I clenched my fists, feeling the tension ripple through my body. I didn't want to leave Erica alone, not even for a minute. But I also needed to think. I glanced at my watch. Just a few minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. The sound of a car engine approaching made me turn my head, and I saw a silver sedan pulling into the driveway. The Uber. I let out a slow breath, and stepped back inside. Olivia was helping Erica to her feet, her arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "The car's here," Olivia said, her tone gentle. Erica nodded weakly, her steps unsteady as Olivia guided her to the door. "I'll ride with her," Olivia said, looking back at me. "I'll make sure she gets home safely." Her words were kind, but they felt rehearsed, like she had prepared them in advance. I nodded, my jaw tight, and watched as she helped Erica into the car. The driver gave me a polite wave, and I waved back, forcing a small smile. I stood there on the porch, my hands in my pockets, watching the car pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. The house felt eerily quiet once they were gone. The tension that had been building inside me didn't ease. If anything, it grew stronger. My mind kept replaying the morning, every detail, every word, every glance. I walked back inside, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The coffee cup was still sitting on the table, untouched since Erica had set it down. I stared at it, my chest tightening. It was just a cup of coffee, ordinary, unassuming, but it carried the weight of everything I had been feeling. It was proof, in its own way, that I hadn't imagined this, that I wasn't crazy. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed more. I needed something concrete, undeniable. Something that would make Olivia's carefully constructed facade crumble. I wouldn't rush into this. I would be patient. I would wait for the right moment. And when it came, I would be ready. Once Erica was gone, the house felt heavier than ever. I stood alone in the middle of the living room, staring at the coffee cup still sitting on the table. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. The air seemed thicker, harder to take in. That damned coffee cup, it was just a plain, ceramic mug, but to me, it was screaming with questions. I couldn't ignore what had really been in it. Why had Erica suddenly felt sick, the same way I had so many times before? I wanted to smash it, to grab it and hurl it against the wall just to hear it shatter into pieces. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over Erica's name. I should call her, I thought. I should check on her, make sure she was feeling better. But what could I say? That I suspected my wife of doing something unthinkable? That I wasn't sure if the very coffee I had handed her might have been laced with something that caused her to feel so ill? It all sounded insane. I closed the phone without dialing. Instead, I sat down on the couch and buried my face in my hands, trying to think. My mind was racing, running through every detail, every interaction over the past few months. All those times Olivia had been so attentive, so thoughtful, so sweet. Had it all been part of a cover? The idea was almost too much to take in, but the pattern was undeniable. Every time I felt sick, she was there, hovering, making excuses, brushing off my concerns. And now, it wasn't just me. It was Erica too. The evidence was piling up, and the truth was becoming harder and harder to ignore. The quiet was oppressive. Every little creak in the house made me jump, my nerves already frayed. I looked at the coffee cup again. It hadn't moved, of course, but it felt like it was watching me, daring me to confront what I was beginning to suspect. I leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, trying to breathe. What's really going on? I whispered to myself. What am I missing? My thoughts went back to that moment at the table, the way Olivia had looked at me when Erica started to feel unwell. It was subtle, but I had seen it, the flicker of worry in her eyes, not for Erica, but for herself. She'd been watching me closely, almost like she was waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if I would piece it together. I stood up, pacing the room. The walls felt like they were closing in, the silence deafening. I had to get out. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside into the cold afternoon air. The chill hit me like a slap, but it cleared my head. I started walking, my hands stuffed into my pockets, my breath visible in the frosty air. My thoughts swirled as I moved through the quiet neighborhood. The trees were bare, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. The sound of my footsteps on the pavement was the only noise, grounding me, giving me something to focus on as my mind churned. I kept walking, block after block, trying to sort through everything. My mind kept returning to the same question: why? Why would Olivia do something like this? If she had been poisoning me, if she had done something to Erica too, what could she possibly gain from it? I thought about our life together, about the years we'd spent building what I thought was a solid marriage. Sure, we had our problems, who doesn't? But I never imagined she would do something so deliberate. There had to be a reason, something I was missing. Then it hit me. The look she had given me when Erica started to get sick, that flicker of fear. It wasn't just about being caught. It was about control. She had been controlling me, keeping me off balance, making me doubt myself. And if I was sick, if I couldn't trust my own body, I would have to rely on her. I stopped walking, my breath coming out in short bursts. Control, I muttered to myself. It's all about control. I turned around and started heading back toward the house. The cold air stung my face, but I didn't care. My thoughts were racing now, pieces clicking into place. She had been manipulating me, maybe even gaslighting me, to keep herself in charge, to keep me dependent on her. And Erica, was she collateral damage, or was she part of the plan too? I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me. If she thought she could keep this up, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. When I reached the house, I stood on the porch for a moment, trying to steady myself. The windows glinted in the late afternoon light, the place looking peaceful and quiet, like nothing unusual had happened. But I knew better. I knew that inside those walls, something dark was lurking, something I needed to confront. I opened the door and stepped inside. The coffee cup was still on the table, still mocking me. I walked over to it, picked it up, and set it in the sink. Just touching it made my skin crawl. I washed my hands and leaned against the counter, staring out the kitchen window. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. I felt like one of those shadows, caught between light and dark, not sure which way to go. Olivia wasn't home yet. She had said she would go with Erica. But now I wondered if she would come back at all. Would she guess that I was onto her? Would she try to cover her tracks? Or would she act like nothing had happened, like everything was normal? I didn't know what to expect, and that uncertainty was eating away at me. I couldn't sit still. I paced the house, checking my phone, looking out the window. The minutes dragged by, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and moved to the living room. The door opened, and Olivia walked in, her smile as calm and sweet as ever. "Erica's resting," she said, hanging her coat by the door. "She just needed some sleep. She'll be fine." Her tone was so light, so casual, like the events of the morning had never happened. I nodded, forcing myself to keep my expression neutral. "That's good," I said. "I'm glad she's feeling better." She walked past me into the kitchen, humming softly. I followed her, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I watched her move, her gestures smooth and practiced, and I wondered how much of it was an act. Was she really this composed, this confident? Or was she just that good at pretending? She turned to me, a questioning look in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "You've been quiet." I shook my head. "Just a lot on my mind," I said. She nodded, smiling gently. "I know. It's been a stressful day, but we'll get through it." Her words were so comforting, so sincere. If I hadn't been paying attention, I might have believed her. But now, I knew better. I knew that underneath that smile, there was something darker, something I needed to uncover. I sat down at the table, watching her as she started tidying up. I stayed quiet, my hands resting on the surface of the table, my fingers tapping lightly. I could feel the tension building again, that weight pressing down on me. But this time, I didn't feel helpless. This time, I felt a spark of determination. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I was getting closer. I was starting to see through her, starting to understand what was really going on. And when the time came, I would be ready. I wouldn't let her keep me in the dark. I wouldn't let her control me any longer. The truth has finally come to light. But the question remains, what would you do if you discovered someone close to you had betrayed you this deeply? How would you respond, knowing the person you trusted most had been hiding a dangerous secret? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This story might be over, but the lessons are just beginning. Stay tuned for more shocking tales you won't want to miss. Trust isn't something to be given blindly. I learned the hard way that even the closest relationships can hide darkness beneath the surface. Pay attention to the details, what people say, how they act, the little things that seem off. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Take action, ask questions, and stay vigilant. Being alert can prevent harm and protect not just yourself, but those around you. In a society where transparency and honesty are essential, we must each do our part. Trust, when earned and nurtured, becomes the foundation of a stronger, safer community.